Senator Markwayne Mullin is one step closer to becoming the next Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, thanks to Democratic Senator John Fetterman. The Senate committee narrowly voted to advance Mullin's nomination following a very fiery confirmation hearing on Wednesday, with the final vote being 8-7.
Rand Paul was, perhaps not surprisingly, the lone Republican senator to vote against Mullin, and John Fetterman, equally unsurprisingly maybe, was the only Democrat to vote for him. This is just the latest example of the Pennsylvania senator breaking ranks with his fellow Democrats. Fetterman was also the only Democratic senator to vote against a war powers resolution that would have limited President Trump's ability to take further military action against Iran. And he said he will remain steadfast in his support of Israel, even if it proves unpopular among his own party.
In an interview on Wednesday, he suggested that Democrats have no true leader and that the party is governed by Trump Derangement Syndrome. Take a look.
Our party is governed by the TDS, and now it's made it virtually impossible without being punished as a Democrat to agree something's good, or I agree with the other side. And I would define that by epic fury. I am literally the only Democrat in America in Congress that I've come across that's saying, I think it's a great thing to break and destroy the Iranian regime.
As for Senator Mullin, his nomination to replace Kristi Noem as DHS Secretary will now head to the full Senate for a vote. Senate Majority Leader John Thune told reporters that vote could happen next week. Markwayne Mullen is, I guess, first up here. Pretty fiery between him and Rand Paul. Rand Paul displeased, understandably, that Mullen had basically taken the side of the neighbour who beat him up. That seems not a good thing to do. But Mullin didn't recoil from that position, stayed up there. So what did you make of that Republican infighting?
Well, I think that Rand Paul, much like Thomas Massie, is one of those members who does not change his stripes for anybody. And it's the same with John Fetterman, right? Those are members who stay absolutely true to what they believe, no matter which side of the aisle they're on and which side their party says they should be on. And in a city that is so regularly full of people who say one thing and do another, it is a bit refreshing that even though it is a bit of party infighting, that we can have our disagreements this publicly and that it exists in the party. I'm good with that. I like it. And I like that they had that exchange. Why? Because one, it shows that Mullin, it shows where he is on this, but it shows that Rand Paul still hasn't changed at all. And that the two of them, I don't think that he's going to get a yes vote on the floor from the senator.
Well, let me muddle the lines of our debate here slightly, because as regards Fetterman, I don't think he has, in fact, been consistent with his beliefs at all. It's certainly the case that he has kind of transformed himself into one of these people who plays a Democrat on Fox News recently. But John Fetterman ran for election as a much more progressive figure than he has actually proven to be. And yes, part of that was that people were kind of maybe fooled by he's a big guy in a hoodie with tattoos and he wears shorts, so he must be a kind of left-wing figure. But, I mean, Fetterman was someone who supported Bernie Sanders at one point, for example. He has moved a long way from that position, and I think is disliked by large parts of the Democratic base, not only for the views that he proposes, but the idea that he posed as something that he did not turn out to be.
So I would push back against that. I was actually working on Dr. Oz's race at that time. And I can tell you that, I'm not saying that this is an excuse and it could be completely wrong, but Senator Fetterman had a major stroke on that campaign. And it changed his life completely. And he was using assisted devices to be able to hear, to be able to speak, to be able to keep up in conversation. So I can also believe that his worldview changed in that campaign, that he didn't somehow pretend to be somebody else, but that his worldview did begin to evolve when his life changed. And I actually kind of believe that one thing can lead to the other. They aren't necessarily what actually caused it, but he had a monumental life change happen where he went through huge bouts of depression. He was at Walter Reed for it. He was openly talking about his suicidal ideations. And if anybody has anything like that, please reach out and get the help you absolutely need in the moment you need it. The man has changed. The man himself has changed over these last few years. So I can imagine his views have as well.
I think that his openness in talking about mental health struggles was admirable. And I think that more people in public life should do that. And I think there should be much less of a taboo or an implicit penalty for doing so. I think that is very healthy. What I think people object to in Fetterman's case from the Democratic side or from the left or liberal side is not, it's not a lack of sympathy for those issues. It's things like, for example, a view of the conflict in Gaza that I think was widely seen on the left as a kind of gloating at Palestinian suffering was not merely pro-Israel, but pro-Israel in the most kind of ostentatiously offensive way possible. So I think that is part of the reason that contributes to the enmity that Fetterman is the target of from the left.
I also think that the left has a huge problem being pro-Israel, supporting our greatest ally in the Middle East. There is a huge anti-Semitic base to the Democrat Party. Democrats admit it themselves. But in a state like Pennsylvania that John Fetterman represents, who's the governor? Josh Shapiro, a Jewish man, who Kamala Harris herself said she did not pick as a VP running mate because he was Jewish and she didn't think that the base would go for that. So I think for what he represents, for the state he represents, he's pretty much over target on it.
So in relation to Josh Shapiro, one of the reasons the base didn't like Josh Shapiro was that he had compared pro-Palestinian demonstrators to the KKK. In relation to the broader issue about Democrat or liberal or left views of Israel, anti-Semitism, and I've always said this throughout this conflict, anti-Semitism exists. It is as gross as any other prejudice and as indefensible as any other prejudice. It is also true that the Prime Minister of Israel is an accused war criminal, that Israel slaughtered Palestinians by the tens of thousands, initially with the assistance of the Biden administration, and that it behaved in a way that was reprehensible to very many people. And the disgust at the Netanyahu government from people on the left was often because that government and its most extreme representatives like Ben-Gvir and Smotrich and many instances of the IDF's actions were worthy of that disgust and opposition.
But Democrats have done a terrible job of keeping their anti-Semitism out of their attacks. Okay, you don't have to. Of their attacks of the Netanyahu administration. They have gone too far continuously and not silenced the voices on their side that are so radically anti-Semitic that regularly members of Congress, members who walk into that Capitol every day, believe in the Intifada, that are Democrats, that believe in, all the way to the sea, to eviscerate the Israeli state, that they are not a sovereign nation, that they should not be there. And their inability, so when they go to attack Netanyahu, they're not doing it just based on the government. They are doing it on the basis that they are anti-Semitic, and that is why they're attacking Netanyahu, because they don't believe in the sovereignty of the Israeli state. There are plenty of people on Capitol Hill that is absolutely true for, and it's on the Democratic side. And that's why Democrats, more largely, are not able to separate the two, the anti-Semitism and the criticism of the Netanyahu administration and government. That's why they're not able to, is because there are actual anti-Semites who are elected members of Congress who do not believe the Israeli state has sovereignty.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but I completely disagree with pretty much everything you have just said. I think that it is an obvious smear of critics of Israeli policy to constantly suggest they're anti-Semitic. I think that Republicans would be better placed to think about people like Congressman Fine and Ogles, who are blatantly Islamophobic in their rhetoric, with no apparent sanction on them at all. Poor old Steve King, not a phrase I would expect to say, a very hardline Republican congressman of the past, was censured for comments that were less bigoted than the Islamophobic ones we have recently seen from the congressmen that I mentioned. The Israeli government includes in its cabinet people who are obviously racist. Itamar Ben-Gvir has convictions in Israeli courts for supporting terrorism. Bezalel Smotrich, in extreme by any stretch of the imagination, the amount of savage suffering imposed on Gaza was indefensible, and people should be forthright in saying that it was indefensible.
people can absolutely hold that opinion, but on the Democrat side, because of the anti-Semitism within the party, they do not hold credibility in that argument. And that is where it gets conflated more largely in the media. And I take your point. There are people on, and I hate saying this, both parties, both sides of the aisle, who need to take a real hard look at themselves and what they put out there and what they espouse and who they hate. Absolutely. That does not conflate the fact that there are anti-Semitic Democrats on the Hill who attack Netanyahu and Israel as a state. You can make every valid point in the world about who he has and how they have executed their thing. But Democrats on the Hill are not as good as being able to make that argument because of their anti-Semitic rhetoric.
I think that, I know we have to wrap in a moment, but I would actually argue that a lot of people who have used the charge of anti-Semitism have discredited it because they so obviously use it against people making valid criticisms of Israel. So that was a rather robust discussion. Up next, we'll take another look at President Trump's joke about Pearl Harbor that went viral yesterday. Stay with us for that.